So we'll go.
This meeting is being recorded.
Excellent. Okay, so we can go ahead and begin. Actually, there has been a request from Delaware Forest Service. If you don't mind, as we go along, if just to let us know where you're coming from. So in the chat, if you don't mind, just putting what town or that you're coming from for tonight, and we'll get to figure out where everyone's coming from here in Delaware. So I actually spent a lovely weekend in your state this weekend, catching crabs down the Indian River and hanging out in Seaford. So you guys have a very lovely state. But we are not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about this, tree planting and tree care. So this is the next section. So, you know, we've learned about trees, how they grow, what they need in order to succeed and establish. We've looked at site selection. So looking at your area, figuring out where you're going to put the trees, where's the best place for them to meet your goals, and really what trees you should use for the particular site. This session now, we're going to talk about the actual planting them. You have your trees there, how to properly get them in the ground to kind of set them up for success, and how to make sure they establish. So a lot of times we talk about tree planting, but what we're really trying to do is establish trees on a site. And some of that comes in with the planting techniques. So we're going to kind of get into that, but here we go. All right. Before we do that, I kind of want to turn it over to Delaware Forest Service again, to Taryn, to talk about the next session while we have that, or the last session. Taryn, you can take it away. Taryn, are you there? Nope.
Erin, you are still muted if you're talking.
Thank you. So I wanted to thank you all for being here today. It's nice to see everybody jumping on again this evening. So we will be having a maintenance day event at the end of our last training session, which is going to be this Wednesday. We would like to see everybody that's been on these training sessions last week and this week to be involved in this maintenance day. This will wrap up the training series and get you all certified as a tree steward. So it'll be June 25th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. We're going to be at the Seaford Sports Complex. I put the address there for you guys, but if you type in Seaford Sports Complex, it will show up. It's pretty easy. It will give you the direct address. So we're going to be mulching some trees and watering some trees that were planted by Seaford in 2019 that were funded by our Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program. Whatever mulch we have left, we're going to go ahead and put around some mature trees in the area and also water them in as well. So it'll be a nice 3-hour event. If you can only make, we'd like to see you, come through the whole session. But if you can only make a couple hours, that'll be okay, enough to suffice to get that certification, at least an hour or more. We will be providing shovels and rakes, wheelbarrows to do the mulching. And then if you guys could bring some gloves, if you want gloves to, spread around the mulch a little bit that way, and also some drinking water as well. It's going to be June, so it's going to start getting warmer out, as we've noticed so far. So thankfully today we have some good water. I'm not sure if your area of the state got any, but up here in Smyrna we got a good amount. So that's nice. I do see that someone's coming in on the chat about being away that weekend. There will be, we can discuss trying to set up another event that you will be able to come and get your certification at that time. We'd like to try to get as many people as we can to make this event, but we'll have a second setup that you'll be able to pop into. So we'll get those logistics set up and sent out in the coming weeks. So Craig, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, sounds good. All right, thanks. All right, so today we are going to talk about the tree planting. So this one comes specifically from the tree owner's manual. So we're going to be referring to this one a lot. So this manual is really designed for planting tree and kind of maintenance, but taking care of the tree afterwards. Again, it's available free as a PDF download. Just Google search. It's the U.S. Forest Service publication, but it's a really good one. So let's talk about trees. Where are we getting them? So obviously you can get trees in really any sizes that you want to plant. There's plenty of private tree nurseries out there where you can just drive in and get a tree. There's wholesalers that sell to contractors, and so which you can't visit unless there's a bulk order on that. And there's public nurseries too. So states, and I know Delaware doesn't have one, but here in Maryland, we have our own state tree nursery, which sells for reforestation, so really small trees. But what kind of trees are you going to get? So we're going to talk about really what's available to you, probably what's best when doing volunteer plantings, so we'll be talking about ball and burlap trees, containerized trees, and bare root trees. There's 3 different types. They all have their pros and cons. All are viable trees. You can get a red maple in all 3 of those different types. So, a lot of these trees you can get in different forms. So we'll go through the pros and cons of them. First, the ball and burlap. So we tree people are very simple people. So ball and burlap is just a root ball is dug and it's wrapped around by burlap. That's it. So ball and burlap. So these trees are grown in a field, but they have to be dug out of the ground. Okay, as you can see in these, rather large trees, they're usually put in a wire cage as well to help the root ball from falling apart. But there's advantages to those. First of all, they're grown in, kind of field soil. So if you remember me talking about the soil in that first thing, where it's that 5% organic material, 45% mineral soil, and then that pore space, that's what they're grown into. So the natural soils that you would have. So they adapt well to planting because you're putting them right back into field soils. Less water is required compared to, say, containerized, because they have actually fewer roots. Probably 80% of the roots, maybe even a little bit more, are sheared off when they dig them. So they're dug usually with a tree spade, and most of the roots are sheared off. It doesn't kill the tree, obviously. They wouldn't sell you a dead tree. But that tree's main job then is to grow new roots. So you do have that root ball, you have a lot of big root system in there, but everything's been sheared off. So it has fewer roots to start with, and that's what it's going to do. It's going to establish new roots, and you may not even see it grow, laterally or vertically, for a little bit, because it's got to put that root system on for first of all. So they're available. Usually it's in larger sizes. So when you're talking about ball and burlap, anytime you see a tree planting where all of a sudden it's a field, then it's some big trees in there, it's usually a ball and burlap. So that's kind of the instant gratification. So you have this tree, it may be, 3 inches of caliper, the stem, so 3 inches diameter there, or calipers, same term. The disadvantages is, when you are cutting them, so it does create a shock for the tree. So to have all their roots taken off. When they do this, though, to minimize the shock, this has to be done in the dormant season. So in the winter season, in through early spring, before the leaves emerge, that's the most of the time that you're going to see this happen. So the availability is limited. You're not going to find ball and burlap trees probably sitting out in midsummer or so. And you really do need, once you get them, you really do need to get them in the ground fairly soon. So within a shorter planting window. So, anytime the ground is thawed, probably through like May or so, depending how much you want to water them. They are expensive. They're really expensive because they're bigger trees. They've been growing for a while. So you think every year a nursery is growing that tree, that's expense. So they're definitely more expensive than other types of trees. And probably the biggest disadvantage is they're really heavy. very heavy to move around, to transport, because it has that root mass, but there's all that soil that's still intact. So that's a lot of weight. You know, you're digging a big hole, very heavy to move around, to put into the hole, take out of the hole, things like that. The next one would be containerized trees. So a containerized trees, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is grown in a container. So the great thing about them is they're available in a variety of sizes. You know, everything down to a containerized seedling, which is a 3-inch by 3-inch by 9-inch container, all the way up to like 20 gallons, 20-gallon containers. So trees come in a variety of sizes. They're easier to transport. They're lighter, but you know, you could bundle a lot of these in the back of a pickup truck. And I know that because I've done this many times, leaning them over. So the availability, they're more available. This is probably one of the most common tree stocks. This is the most common tree stock that you would find in a nursery. There are some disadvantages. Well, you know, when you get them to the site, it's easy to move around to different locations. And we'll kind of talk about that next week too, is laying out your planting. So it's really easy in that container to move things around. Disadvantages.
Craig Highfield.
They are.
I am
Whoop,
the director of the forest
whoop,
programs.
I don't know what that is. Someone watching there. Sorry about that. I don't know what that was. So the disadvantages, they're not grown in a natural soil. So it's kind of like this soilless medium, because, you know, they start out when they're very small and they're moved from container to container as they're growing. So, you know, a 15-gallon container tree, well, that thing starts out, you know, as a tiny tree you know, maybe in a 1-gallon pot. And then every year it's moved to another one, but it's not natural soil. It's not field soil that are using. It's like your best, manufactured soil, high in organic material. They add minerals and things like that. So it's not natural. So transporting them into the field, there's a little bit of shock that happens. They do have their entire root system, which is, you know, great. But it does require more watering. And the biggest problem with these, and we'll show you how to get to deal with is they're often root bound. So as those roots are growing, you know, they can't go through the container. So they're often circling. And so you almost have a root mass that's in the shape of the container that you have, which you do have to address. And we're going to talk about before you do plant. So you can see things like that. So there's a 2-gallon container and a 3-gallon container and the containerized seedlings. So they come in a variety of different sizes. So a lot of different species available for that too. But there's that soil that I'm talking about. So I wish I had that kind of soil in my garden or so. But yeah, so it's not your natural field soil. It's like your high test soil for really growing trees fast to get them from one container to the next. And then this is the next one. They're bare root trees. And like I said, tree people we're simple people. This is just a tree where the roots are bare. So there's no soil on the roots. They're either grown, you know, like that the tree on the right, that's called a bare root seedling. You know, they're just grown out in the field, they're dug out, but the soil doesn't come with it because they're very tiny. But the one on the left are often grown in, you know, a soilless kind of condition. It could be, you know, another one that's kind of manufactured. It could be grown in gravel, and they're given what they need, but you can see the roots are intact. And we'll talk about the advantages. So the roots are intact, and look how they're growing. So they're growing exactly how you want them to be growing, because they're in that soilless kind of medium when they're growing. So they're pulled out, there's no soil attached to those roots, but those roots are perfect. They're growing in the direction that you want them to be growing in. They're easy to handle because if there's no soil on them, they're very light. So even larger trees, like you know, an inch, almost 2-inch caliber tree grown this way is easy to move around. You can just pick them up with one hand. There's often higher survival in urban areas. They do really well when planted correctly in urban areas compared to ball and burlap and containerized. Disadvantages, well, they're only available in the dormant season. So, you know, they cannot be grown. You can't find, if you did this to a tree that already had leaves and took all the soil off them to transport them, it would dry up. It just wouldn't make it. So they have to be available in the dormant season. You do have to keep the roots cool and moist in transport. You don't want them to dry out or the roots just die. So there's limitation when you can plant them as well. So it's usually a spring thing. You could do them late fall if they're available. So you have a shorter planting window than even like ball and burlap. And then not as many nurseries grow them. So they're harder to find. Hopefully that changes when, you know, demand increases, but they are harder to find. Now, bare root, I'm just gonna throw that one out there. You guys probably won't be planting bare root seedlings because they're a year or two old. This is what we use for reforestation. So sometimes you hear people talking about bare root trees and they mean these, but usually in an urban suburban context, the bare root trees are the ones that I just talked about. They're kind of the bare root saplings. They're bigger. So for us, you know, these are cheap. They're, you know, 75 cents to buy. And, you know, that's why we plant a lot of them. They do extremely well. You don't need a lot of water. We never water them. We just count on rain. Although this year is a tough one to grow because they don't have a root system yet, but they're going to be putting that out. They're very vigorous. So now you've selected the tree, you're at the nursery, you know what kind of tree that you want, you know, just now's the time to kind of get under the hood, is really inspect the trees. So not all nursery stock is high quality. You know, you go to some of those big box stores and some of the trees out there, they're not the highest quality. So, you know, this is something you're buying, this is your investment. You might as well get something that looks good now. And so this is kind of what I'm talking about. So you're looking for any kind of damage on that tree. You can see that epicormic shoots that I talked about. If there is damage, a tree stresses and those dormant buds come alive. That's what's happening with this black gum tree. We have these sprouts coming out, and then you can see where there was damage to the base of that trunk. Now that, like I said, it's compartmentalizing like we talked about. And you can see there's already new bark over where that gash was, but that's still something that is damn. I wouldn't select this tree to put out there. So if there's other ones, you can do it. On these pictures on the right, you can see the same species of tree. One just has a really crooked stem. Now that tree probably will grow perfectly fine. And, you know, in 10 years, you wouldn't even notice. Even in 5 years, you probably wouldn't even notice that crook right down at the base of that stem. Because it'll add wood, that tree will add wood at different proportions, you know, to get it upright. So, but, you know, why risk it? If you have the same trees, I'd pick a nice straight one, good stem. And this is kind of what you're looking for. This comes out of the book. So when you're selecting a tree, you want, you know, initially you want at least 60% of the total tree to be that crown. And in evergreens, you want that, or conifers, you want that 75%. So that means that tree, when you're buying it, you know, 60 to 75% of it should be the part that's supporting the leaves, that crown. If you remember me talking about the crown at the beginning. Now, that'll change as that tree grows, as it starts to grow up. But initially, you want that. And the reason being is the more crown it has, the more leaves it has, the more food it's producing, the faster it's going to grow and the better it's going to grow. So that's what you're kind of looking for. You're looking for that one central leader, you know, when you're looking at trees. Now, some trees like, you know, river birch or something like that, that naturally has multi-stems, you may not find that. But, you know, in some of these canopy trees that you want that one leader initially, because you remember, all trees have that strong apical dominance, that one strong leader. If you can't find the one leader, having two that you could potentially prune would work. You should inspect the bark, make sure there's no cuts in it, any holes in it. You want the trunk to be right there in the center, that if you move it around a little bit, you should see the whole root ball kind of moving with it. You don't want that to move independently. It means there's separation there. And then kind of inspect down into the dirt too. So we'll kind of talk about that root collar that you're looking for. But, you know, what often happens at nurseries, when they're moving it from container to container, they just pile more soil on the top. So they move it to a container, throw more soil onto it. But you want to get it so there is a root collar, so your noticeable root collar on there. So anything that has more than 4 inches of soil kind of over those roots, you start to get some threats to the root system because it's buried a little bit too deep. And we'll talk about that in a second. I'll show you what I mean. The next thing, so you have your trees that you want. Think about how you're going to transport them to the site. So, you know, you got to have a vehicle to be able to do it. You know, if you have a pickup truck, you know, a lot of those trees are going to be exposed a little bit, not at the nursery, but as you're riding down the highways, you know, the wind's going to take those. You just want to set up the trees so they're not constantly rubbing on the side. Nothing's happening to the branches. Make sure the trees are secure and not moving around as you do it. Storage. So, I mean, you can buy trees now and just store them for whenever you want to plant them, but you're going to have to constantly take care of them. So we always recommend that you don't pick up the trees until you're ready to plant them. A lot of times you can order from the nursery early and then tell them when you want to pick them up. So in that meantime, they're still taking care of them for you. So don't pick them up too early. When you do, kind of keep them in a cool area, somewhere so they're not going to dry out, even if you're watering them. Try to find an area, and it's okay for a couple of weeks if they're not in that direct sunlight, if they're shade intolerant. That's okay. Keep them in a cool, shady area. Avoid those windy areas, you know, where, you know, the wind's funneled or whatever, because that just dries them out as well. And then always keep the roots. Doesn't have to be soaking, but keep them moist. In those containers, or if you're doing bare root, they have to be kept moist until you get them in the ground. As soon as that root dries out, it's done. It dies. It won't come back. Okay, so now you're setting this up. So this does come from the book as well. We'll kind of go over each of the things. You know, moving the tree to the site. There's ways to do it. We'll talk about that in a second. Often when you pick them up at the nursery, they're going to have like 1 million tags on them, which are great information. It'll give you the species, it'll give you the growing conditions that it needs to thrive. It probably has something in there about the nursery. That's all fine and dandy, but once you get them there, make sure all that stuff is off. Any kind of plastic around it, or even, you know, cotton line or whatever, just cut all that stuff off there. Don't forget about it. You might not think it could do damage, but a lot of times on these small branches, they can girdle as the tree grows. You know, those plastic things last for a while, so it can girdle a tree. Let's see, prune critical branches and no others. So when you're looking at the tree, those first couple years, you don't really need to worry about pruning the tree, okay? Because what you want to happen is you want that tree to have as many branches, as many leaves as possible, so it can grow. You want those roots to establish. It can't establish unless the tree has food. The food is produced in the leaves, if you remember. So you want them to build up those reserves. So unless you could always prune broken branches or dead branches off right away. But I wouldn't prune the crown down at all for the first several years. Now, eventually you're going to have to, you may want to, because you're planting these trees in a built environment. And, you know, you kind of, you know, some branches could be obstructing things, go across a sidewalk or get too close to a structure. So you're going to be pruning throughout, but not in the first couple of years unless it's really necessary. So broken branches, dead branches, you can prune right away. If there are 2 leaders and one, you can clearly prune out to make that 1 leader. You can do that as well within those first couple of years, is select that leader you want to control the tree, to be that one that grows straight up. Because if it's already up and you prune the other one, it'll do well, it'll grow up and control the tree for a while. Moving the trees, like I said, you know, you want to treat them well. The trees are tough. But you can see in this picture here, one person's carrying the trees by the base, the other person's carrying it by the container. Well, these trees are probably fine if you grab by the trunk, but you are putting stress on the trunk when you actually do it. So the way on the left is incorrect, the way on the right is correct. You're grabbing it by the container, which is not putting the stress on the roots or the stem. There's no potential really to break that stem or to wring that or to loosen bark, things like that. So make sure you're taking it by the container as often as possible. I think we went into this. So if you do have to prune, just coming back into that, and we'll probably talk about this next week, but if you remember when we talking about that root collar where the meristems are, that the secondary meristems, the cambium, it's going to compartmentalize that wound. There it is. So if you are going to prune branches, you're going to prune just outside of that root collar. Okay, so if you look on this tree that I showed you before, 2 cuts you might want to prune right away. First, this dead leader, you could prune that off. You could probably leave it. It's not going to be a big deal. And then if you want to select a leader, you know, the one on the right, you can see just outside where that the branch collar is you just kind of prune it from right there. You're selecting the leader on the left to be the dominant. So you can do those things like that for the pruning. But other than that, I would leave most branches ready to go making food. Okay, there's where I want you to do that. All right, now you have your trees there. They're kind of all set up. Now it's time to get them in the ground. All right, so now you have to decide, well, how are you going to get your holes? How are you going to dig your holes? The most inexpensive way to do is obviously a shovel, but depending where you're planting, I would also prepare to have like a pickaxe on hand. Just because, you know, maybe not down in Sussex County, but, you know, up in Newcastle, you're going to experience more rocks in the soil. So, but even compacted soil sometimes can be loosened up really well with a pickaxe. So you might use a combination. So shovels are great. But maybe have a pickaxe on site, especially if you have found that there's compacted soil. You've done your site assessment. First thing, depending where you're planting, you know, a lot of times people are planting into yards, into sod, those type of things, public parks. The first step when you have your site where you want to plant it is remove the sod. Just take a shovel and peel that off the surface. You just don't want that interfering. You know, even chunks of sod can reestablish. You want to kind of clear your planting area from existing vegetation. So you kind of want to do this before the hole, because you don't want to dig a hole and throw that sod down in the hole where the root system could come back to life and it could be an issue. So just remove it entirely. Okay, just usually peels off when you have that sod. So now you have it ready, and this is now where you're going to kind of dig your hole. So it's the size that you want. You're going to dig your hole 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball. Okay, so you kind of measure your root ball. If your root ball or the size of that container is, let's say, a foot and a half in diameter, you're going to have a hole that's 3 feet in diameter, or even larger. It really depends on, you know, compacted soils. You might want to go 3 times as wide. You know, nicer, less compacted or sandy soils, you only really need to go twice as wide of what that hole is. You're going to dig that hole wider than the root ball that you have, or that surface area. Something to consider then is kind of getting that tree ready to be planted. Is often, you know, that soil is piled up on that tree, like we said before. You need to get that off. So you're actually looking for the root collar on that tree. Okay, like I said, that nurseries are often piling soil on top of that tree, so it's piled up. So you can see this tree on the left. That is that root collar. Even the small tree has it. That's just kind of where it widens at the bottom and where the first kind of major roots come out from that tree. That's the part that should be above ground. You want that root collar above ground. You can see the tree in the center. Well, if it looks pretty straight, like a telephone pole going right in, that root collar is down in the soils where it shouldn't belong. It just leaves it more susceptible to pathogens, to rotting eventually. So you want to clear that out. So just digging down, getting rid of that top layer of soil off that containerized tree, if you're using those, is essential until you find those first roots. Okay, that may require you to dig, you know, 3 inches off the top, taking 3 inches of those soils off the top. Take a look at that tree right here. The person has the hole ready and they have that tree ready to go in, but that is, you know, it's the telephone pole stuck right in the ground. There's no flare at the bottom. The root collar's not there, as opposed to this one. Now take a look at this tree, and you can even see the top, a couple inches of that root collar, well, they was under soil. You can see how dirty it is from right there. You need to excavate that, and that needs to be at the surface of your planting. So that's where the tree is meeting the ground. You want to keep that above ground. You want that flare. So the next thing is the digging of the hole. So you have your area, you have your tree kind of ready to go. You want to dig the hole. So like I said, twice as wide or 3 times as wide as the original, the root ball there. But you only need to go as deep as that root collar. You want loose soil on the sides, but you want solid soil to hold the tree. Like, you don't want to have loose soil that you're setting your tree on, because what ends up happening is the tree settles when you water it, or over time, then it'll sink down in, and then you've just taken that root collar, which you took your time to keep above ground, sinking in. So you kind of want a nice firm, doesn't have to be compacted, just has to be kind of nice firm bottom where that tree is going to sit on. Because remember, most of those roots are growing laterally. Okay, they're not going down into the ground. You want looser soil on the lateral portions. So, you know, just measure the tree. You know, you don't put a $100 tree in a $10 hole. So you want to dig that $100 hole. Take your time with it. This is where your tree's going into the ground. So it's dug right here. You can see it's about twice as wide as that tree right there. Now, what happens when you're digging? So using a shovel is, you know, you're essentially pushing a wedge into the ground. So it's, you know, you're pushing the wedge into the ground, and it's creating pressure on both sides of the shovel when you're digging. It's kind of like a plow. If you're farming, you're plowing, you're compacting things as you're moving that metal through the soil. And that's what ends up happening when you're digging the hole. You're lifting that soil out. It's loosening the soil as you're digging out the hole, but on that kind of the outside of that hole, it often gets compacted. You can see it's nice and flat right there. Well, trees will grow through that. Roots will, but what you want to do is kind of loosen that up. So you have your hole, it's kind of loosen those lateral areas, because that's where you want those roots to go. You want them to go easily through that. So sometimes if it's compacted, roots will have tougher time getting through it. So I often, in the hole, then just take my shovel and I'm just going to make cuts going, you know, perpendicular to the edge of that hole. So it kind of looks like that on the edge. You can see that's a nice area for roots to get going through. Next, and this is kind of tips of the trade here, and probably many times I didn't do this, but I would always have either a tarp handy or just use the container that you have the tree in to hold the soil that you're digging out. And there's nothing worse of piling it next on the grass and then having a hard time getting it off the grass back into the hole. So a lot of times you may not need it if you have a containerized tree with a lot of soil in it, but you know, often you want to get soil back in there to pack around. So it's easier to take it off a tarp or out of a container. So kind of hold that, have a tarp handy, use the bucket that is going in. And when you're digging that out, you know, put that soil in there. This is the time now. You have your tree kind of working, you know, you cleared out the top, you found the root collar, you want to get it in the ground, you take it out of the container. This is the time where you deal with the root problems, especially in a containerized tree. Now, bare root could be this way as well, or even ball and burlap. You might want to do some pruning, but for a containerized tree, this is where you do your corrective pruning now. I mean, you're thinking about this tree in the next 50 years. You want those trees to go well, but it all starts on that time you're putting it in the ground. So you want to avoid things like that. So obviously, you know, that root collar is out of the ground, but look at those roots, you know, still in the shape of the container that they planted it in. And all that's going to do, because it wasn't corrected earlier, is those roots are going to grow, and eventually it's going to girdle parts of the other root. Okay, so take care of those roots issues. So you can see on this tree, all those fine roots, but the whole thing's in the size of the container. So this doesn't seem too bad. You can see some of the root problems on that bottom right corner. So of that picture, it would be the kind of the top right there. And you can see some roots kind of growing up. You want to start just cutting roots. Remember, ball and burlap have most of the roots cut. So it's not killing the tree. You want to establish this now. You know, those fine roots, those trees are growing back every year. But you want to start correcting some of that so that tree doesn't grow in the shape of a container. Even the small trees, you can see that those fine roots are in that square container. This was a really bad one. This was a plant we did in Hagerstown, but this tree had been growing in that pot forever. You can see how thick those roots are. I mean, you literally have to get in and just start cutting. This one's circling the top, it's going around the tree. But don't be afraid to just cut. So you can use kind of hand shearers there, the picture on the right, and you're going to cut the roots up to where they're turned from growing away from the tree, if that makes sense. So you can see where it hits the container and starts to turn. Cut it from where it hits that container and turns. You're just going to cut it so it'll continue to grow away from the tree. You can use those pruners. You can use a knife. A serrated knife works really well. So this is a technique called butterflying, the picture on the left, where just for those fine roots especially, is you're just going to, put that knife in there and you cut all the way to the bottom, just sawing through it. You do it on 4 sides, and we do it on 4 areas around the tree, kind of, on the circle, each end. And then you kind of just could spread those sections apart to kind of grow laterally. So you can butterfly that tree, just cutting out all that root system to get it to grow out. Kind of massaging it too. So a tree that's not so bad, some of those fine roots, you may not need to cut, just kind of getting in there like these ladies are doing. They may not even realize it, but their hands are on, they're kind of ripping these small roots out, pulling things out. A lot of the stuff can be done by hand on those fine roots. I would use a knife or kind of hand pruners for some of those larger roots. Next thing is kind of getting into the ground. So obviously something issue there. So she hasn't addressed any of the issues on this tree, this young lady. Hasn't found the root ball, didn't deal with the roots, and is grabbing it by the stem to swing it. So you can see how small that tree is where her left hand is. I mean, there's a potential to do damage there by swinging that tree like that. This tree, well, when you're moving it into that hole, you do have to grab the stem of the tree to get it down in there. But she has proper technique right there, hands on the bottom. Looks like she's addressed the root. I don't see a root collar there, but you can kind of work on this. So she's going to transport it to the hole that way. So grabbing the stem, but supporting it on the bottom. Even when you get into the ground, a lot of times you can just get it in the ground to start dealing with some of the roots because you have a wide hole, and then you can start cutting some of the roots. That way the soil that's on that root ball can just fall right into the hole. It can be used, but the tree is kind of where you want it. And then you can start working on the roots because that root ball will start to collapse as you start to cut things out. So if you already have it in the hole, you're already 1 step ahead. For those ball and burlap, so they come in that cage and they come with the burlap around. Now burlap, is just cotton. You would think it would just break down when it's in the ground, and eventually it will, but it does take a while for that to happen. So you need to cut the burlap off that tree. You could do that in the hole. You just want to get it off those lateral roots that are growing. Those cages, so they often come in cages, just the easier transport, and it holds the roots together, or the root ball together, is you want to cut that. So it might be heavy, you might even get it into this hole, and then you just start cutting with wire clippers, just cutting that away. You don't necessarily have to take it off the bottom when that tree's set up, or the burlap off the bottom, but you want those lateral roots to grow laterally. So you want to get all that stuff off there if you can. Next is just kind of make sure your level's the same. You want to make sure that root collar is above ground. It's actually better to plant a tree too shallow than too deep. Those roots would die, but as long as you have lateral roots growing and that top layers of soil, it's best. And a lot of times that's a solution for really clay, poorly drained soils, is to plant a little bit shallower than you would think. That's where your active soils are. So you have a tree in your ground, you have everything, you have your roots looking nice, this hole looks great, you're ready to go. Now the key is stabilizing the tree. So you want to make sure that that tree is looking good, looking fine. You want that main stem to be perpendicular with the ground, looking, because this is the tree, you want it to grow. if it's planted slanted, well, that's how the tree is going to grow until it corrects itself and grows up. And you might have a nice bow in the stem. So you want to make sure the stem's looking good. It's firmly on the ground. Everything's where you want it. This is where you can make adjustments. So if it's leaning one way, you can just sort of adjust it, put more soil under one side. You want that tree looking good, perfectly straight up. And then you start to backfill it. Okay, that's why you have that soil that you saved sort of on the whole. You slowly kind of backfill it all the way around. When you do that, you can actually, you don't want to compact it, but you definitely want to take out the air pockets. So you can firmly press the soil around it a little bit at a time, because you don't want to fill it all up and then try to do it, because chances are you're going to leave some air pockets. These big air pockets, pores are good, air pockets are bad because they'll just dry out your roots. So you add soil around it, you kind of press it down a little bit, add more soil. You know, you at this time, if it's, you know, really compacted soil, you can mix your backfill with some mulch, or not mulch, compost. It's great. So you're slowly kind of filling that up, getting it all the way around. Once you get it to the surf, you just kind of firm up that tree. You don't want it to blow over in the wind. So you kind of firm that soil around it. You can kind of, you know, like I'm doing there, just push my foot around, just compressing it a little bit to make sure it's nice and firm. This is the point too, where you can stake a tree. And I didn't throw any slides on staking. I don't know why I didn't, but you know, a lot of times, especially a larger tree can get really wind heavy, can blow over. You know, staking a tree, usually 2 stakes opposite each other, tying the tree with some sort of guy wire to protect the bark, is appropriate. You know, it's going to keep that tree, but it's only appropriate for the first year of that tree. You don't want the tree to rely on the support of those stakes, or it just won't put on that reaction wood to firm it up. So it's usually just 1 year until those roots establish, and then you take those stakes off, you take the wires off. So many trees I've seen where people have staked it and they just never take it down, and you know, it's totally wrapped. So there you go. You have your tree, it's in the ground, holes around it.
Beautiful thing.
Next thing I would do, even before mulching, is water it. Okay, this is the most stressed out your tree is going to be, is when you're taking it from a container or from wherever it is and you're putting it in its new home, its new site. So I'd water it. So 5 gallons of water for that tree when it first gets in there is not a problem. So you want to slowly water. It's just going to all run off. So you can water a little bit at a time, your trees, but you want to get it nice and wet in there. Let it drain. But this is key, is watering that as soon as you get it in, some good water on there so it establishes to the site. And then it's mulching. So mulching a tree, you don't have to mulch a tree, but mulching a tree has so many benefits that I don't know why you wouldn't. It's a way just to kind of help. It's an easy way to help protect your tree. So essentially, mulching is going to shade out weeds around your tree. It's going to help your tree that the soil retain water because you're putting this layer of mulch on that's going to hold it back. It's going to allow rainwater to slowly permeate into the soil instead of running off around like what open soil would happen. So it prevents erosion from your tree. It lets water permeate into the soil, and eventually mulch breaks down and adds to the organic material of that soil. You know, it often can help stimulate growth, you know, especially in the spring when it's, you know, kind of a dark mulch. You might have shredded hardwood mulch where it heats up faster, you know, in the day's sun. So I think mulch is tremendous for trees to do that, but you also want to make sure you do it correctly. So there's nothing sadder in tree planting when you've taken all your effort to do this and then someone just mulches it like the volcano, the tree on the right. So this happens often, way too often. Even landscapers do it, and you know, you're just inviting that tree to succumb to the pathogens or, you know, the moisture in that mulch, to start to, you know, fungus gets in there and bark starts to rot, and so the tree is not really happy. So mulch should go around the tree, but it should not touch the trunk of the tree. And so that's why we always say the 3-3-3 method. So you want at least a 3-foot diameter of mulch around your tree, you want or only 3 inches thick, because you don't want to pile it too high, because then you start to get issues with gas exchange within your roots. You're essentially could smother your roots if you add too much. And then you want it 3 inches away from the stem of the tree. And so that's what this guy's doing right here. Has his mulch. You can start to see the donut forming on that mulch. He's starting to pull it away from the tree. So the 3-3-3, and you'll be okay. So what type of mulch? There's a couple mulches out there that you might want to use. Like I said, probably the most common that people use is the shredded hardwood, widely available. You can get it delivered by cubic yard, or you can just buy bags of it. It's easily accessible, widely available. Sometimes, the bags can be very heavy, especially if they're wet. Some other issues with them that you have to consider is it's perfect to use, but sometimes it kind of knits together, kind of forms a mat, especially with the rain and then the hot sun kind of regime that we have. You start to get it as it starts to break down, acts like a mat, which sometimes could prevent water from penetrating it. So it kind of shoots water to the side, doesn't allow it to percolate as quickly as it would. And then easy way around it is just, occasionally adding more mulch, raking away the old mulch, or just kind of breaking up that mat to allow it to do it. Worms eat, it breaks down very easily, which is great because it adds to the soil, but you do have to replace it kind of every year. Sometimes in drier conditions, it lasts a little bit longer, but eventually you're going to have to replace it, add more mulch as it breaks down. But as it's breaking down, it's just improving the tilt of the soil around your trees. There's also pine bark mulch. This drains extremely well, and it's essentially pine bark mulch. It's the bark of pines that are used very light. The bags are very light because there's not that, the moisture that it's holding on to that it starts to break down like a shredded one. You're buying them in nuggets, what you do. Worms don't generally eat them. They don't break down as quickly, so they last a lot longer. They hold well on a slope. They're not going to form that mat, but they're not going to really add to that organic material that's within your soil. So, both are great. Choose what you like. But the bags are lightweight, so you can transport a lot more, move them around much easier. And then the last thing, so you do have the stakes that we had talked about, staking up your tree, but there's also deer protection as well. So if you're planting in an area where there's a lot of deer, which driving over on Delmarva on Friday night, there is a boatload of deer in there. There's a lot of deer, and they love to eat the kinds of leaves and especially the buds of the trees. So, it's a nice sweet little snack for them. So sometimes when you're planting trees in high deer densities, you do have to keep the deer off them. There's several ways to do this, but you essentially want to have protection until those branches are higher than where the deer can eat. So 5 feet above where the deer are going to have trouble reaching up to get them. Or there's enough branches that are out of the reach of the deer that, the tree's going to keep adding growth. Those lower branches that might be sacrificed a little bit, but, enough growth is happening where it's not an issue. So, fencing, there's just, regular fence you can put around on there. They come in different sizes. We use, the steel galvanized, or you can use, there's plastic fencing. You can set it up any way. The idea is just keeping the deer off them. We use, on our reforestation projects, those tree shelters, and you can see those there on the left, kind of protect them. They're 5 feet long. Deer generally aren't able to reach the top of those, although deer might be getting taller, depends. And then on the right, there's these tree guards. They're more for protecting the bark of the tree. So they're nice, especially when you're putting in a larger tree. These are 4 feet tall. So if you have 4 feet of clearance on that stem, these work great. So you're planting like 15-gallon containers. You have a lot of, maybe a lot of stems showing. You could just wrap these around. And what they're doing is they're protecting against that rub. If you remember me showing those pictures of the buck rub. So buck love to rub their antlers to remove the velvet. They also like to mark it during the rut. So this helps protect that. So it's really firm plastic. You can just wrap around the trunk like that. You don't really have to attach it that much. And it kind of protects that trunk as the tree grows until they remember that tree is going to put on that secondary bark. And it'll be big enough where for some reason deer don't use them anymore. And then the key, and this is what you guys will be doing in June. This is the key to any reforestation, any suburban, urban tree planting, is the maintenance. And we can't stress that enough. We never plant a tree unless we know there's going to be maintenance happening, whether we're providing it or we know someone's going to be providing it. And, the key of that is water. This has been a really tough year for trees. For this kind of early drought we've been having. It was awesome to see some of the rain today, but you want to make sure those trees are kind of taken care of. So watering is key. You want to make sure that first couple years that they're receiving water weekly. It's usually 1.5 inches over the root zone per size of the tree. This is in the book as well. So obviously bigger trees, they have a bigger kind of the root ball. They need more per week, but some of it's going to be rain. So kind of knowing how much it rained that week and then being able to provide more. And a nice slow soak is often the best on that. But you can, this book kind of gives you a clear schedule of what you should be looking for, in year one and years beyond. So, these year trees are making investments. They're going to grow well. And if you pick the right tree for the right site and you're taking care of it, those roots are going to establish. Then after a few years, it's just, the tree takes off. It's fine. You just have to go periodically back to see if you need to prune, anything else that's going on with your tree. But that maintenance is key for the first couple of years to get things established. So watering, again, that's probably the most important thing that you're doing right now. You really obviously only need to water it during the growing season. And it's usually the most stressful time is those drought times. Normally it was in the summer, but apparently now it's spring droughts that we're having. And so those are some of the guidelines that we have as they get bigger. Drip line just means water within the drip line just means the furthest end of the branches where water would drip off. It's usually where we're watering, because if you remember, as those roots get established in, let's say, year 2 and year 3, they're far out. They're going out to search for water. So you want to make sure when you're watering, as it's getting bigger, you're watering around. You're bigger than what, just around the stem. So you're getting further and further a little bit every year. And this is just kind of the summary. This is also in the book as well. Things to think about with that is, staking. Again, this one has the staking thing there. You're only going to put it in really for 1 year. Remove tags, make sure that root collar is exposed, 2 to 4 inches of mulch, or do the 3-3-3. It's easier to remember. Set ball on firmly packed soil. So remember, I said the bottom of the hole should be firm. It shouldn't be loose. Everything else on the side should be loose. And you're backfilling around it a little bit at a time, and then use that water early on when you're planting. As soon as that tree goes in the ground, you're going to plant it. And then remove the tags and ties. And so if you see that tree on the right, it's a piece of hose, but it held the guy wires that was attached to the stakes, so it wouldn't rub, which is it's a great idea. So when the wind's blowing, it's not going to cut that wire into the bark, but nobody ever took it off. And so what you have is a tree that's now has a piece of hose growing out of it. So won't necessarily kill it, but it creates a weak spot within that union. So it's always going to be a hole that goes all the way through. That's leaves the tree vulnerable to pathogens. And then, at the end, there's a perfectly planted tree by a group of volunteers. You can see the root collar is out and exposed. You can see none of the mulch is sitting on the side of that stem. You can see it looks pretty straight up. No pruning. Most of that tree still has its crown right there. It wasn't pruned away. But that tree's looking pretty good. Again, so that's all I had before questions. I just wanted to remind you again, I just threw that slide up again about the hands-on thing, if you can make it down there for Delaware, which is good. So now I'll end it there and open it up to any questions that we might have.
Yeah, we have one question that came through the chat a little bit ago, asking if you can add water as you're backfilling a hole, each layer, so to speak.
Yes, yeah, definitely can. And that helps the soil settle because it'll be extra loose on that. I wouldn't overwater it because you don't want to get into the thing where you're turning it into mud and then adding more on top. So you can certainly do that. Add water as you're starting to go.
Good to know. I always thought it was good to slop it around in there and get it.
That was the only question so far.
Excellent. Okay. Well, it's easy peasy. I do highly recommend that you go and download that tree owner's manual. It's a really, really good one.
A couple more questions just came in. Someone mentioned they planted a tree badly 3 weeks ago. Should they dig it up and correct their mistakes, especially the root crown height?
Yes, definitely. There's still time. If you planted it 3 weeks ago, you can do it, but just know when you dig it up, there is going to be that stress to it. So I would dig it up. I wouldn't do it in the midday. I would either do it in the evening or do it early morning. Correct where your mistake was, and then make sure everything goes down, and then just water it. And then water for like the next couple of days, and it should be fine, totally fine.
It won't be as good if you have enough.
Great. Another question. Oh, do you like using water bags which sit around trees?
Yeah, I mean those gator bags. Yeah, that we've used them before. For sure, that's a way actually of watering more efficiently, especially if you have a lot of trees. Because what that does, those gator bags kind of wrap around the tree. You fill them up, and they slowly release water over a period of time, which allows more water to percolate. Those are good. I don't know if Delaware Forest Service, you have an opinion. Sometimes when they get old, those holes do get clogged. There's some maintenance on them. I don't know, Delaware Forest Service, if you guys had an opinion on the gator bags.
Yeah, hi, it's Taryn. We do recommend using the gator bags. Sometimes they do need to be replaced, every so often. Just keep an eye on it and see, how it's doing with the holes, if they're getting clogged, or if they have any rips in them, or if you have your landscaper and he's coming around and kind of hits it with the weed eater. We've had that happen before at some locations that we've done plantings at. But they are really good. It's a slow release water. Normally they hold about 20-25 gallons of water. So they're very effective.
Yeah, we like them. There's also some of them, we haven't tried it yet, but there's also things called tree diapers. I don't know if anyone's tried those, but they were developed out of Virginia Tech, but they're little donuts you put around the tree, and they're filled with a polymer or so that kind of like diapers, I guess. So when water hits them, they absorb the water, and then they slowly release the water back into the tree. So they take advantage of some of the rain that happens to kind of store some water and do it. So I've never used them, but I know they're out there.
Yeah, same here, Craig. We've never used the tree diapers, but we have heard of them. And also I just wanted to mention too, with the gator bags, to make sure that those are removed during the winter time. And then you can put them back on for the spring, on those new plantings.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, take them off.
I'm glad you brought up the tree diapers because there was a question that came in about them, just asking for your opinion. So you already answered that, Craig.
Yeah.
Another question is specifically asking, does a multi-stem crepe myrtle pruned up into a tree shape need to be staked?
I don't know.
Well, that I don't know. I mean, I would say the rule with staking is after the tree, any tree gets in the ground, if there's a big crown still on it, like I just said, crown is what you want. If there is susceptibility for that tree to blow over. So if it's an area that's going to be in high winds, think of it that way. After you plant it, if it's going to be, if there's a little bit more give to it, but it's location and how big that crown is. sometimes we'll stake them in parks just to prevent vandalism. So, from easy pulling the tree out type of thing as well. So that I don't know. I would see where your situation was, judge that, and how big that crown is.
Thank you. Anything else?
Thanks. What about the use of leaf litter rather than mulch?
Not the same.
I'd say anything that you leaf litter, that's organic material. Obviously depends on the type of leaves as well, but yeah, I see no issue with anything you could put down. I mean, down south they use pine straw for everything. So yeah, I think there's benefit to that. Some leaves like maple leaves, they have a lower lignin content than, let's say, an oak leaf. So they tend to dry up and decompose much quicker. So that's great. And if you have a good source of leaves that you're using, that's fine too. Anything that you do with mulch, though, if you're using things like that, is kind of knowing what's in your mulch as well. So where it's coming from, because a lot of times with mulch, there could be some seeds in there of plants that you don't quite want. So always kind of monitor that as you're adding it.
Next question, someone's wondering if a tree has been planted for 10 years, can you cut the lead?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you want to, if it's part of the goal you have for shaping that tree, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you can prune really anything. As the tree gets bigger, pruning becomes can be a slight issue. It takes longer for that tree to compartmentalize that wound, but for sure, I mean, you can shape trees for a while by pruning them. Yeah, not lead, you can do it if the lead's not growing well, or if you want to favor another one for a structural issue or something. Yeah, by all means, you can prune. And then as the tree gets older, you never prune more than 20% of the crown. So always under. So you look at it, even if you want to prune a lot, you look at the crown, kind of make an estimation of how many branches you can actually prune off. Never more than 20% is the general rule.
Great. And last question, at least as of now, is someone said they found an oak seedling growing too close to their house. They want to transplant it when they clear out an area. Should they leave it as is until ready to move it? And would that be in the fall?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's awesome. You want to save it. Oak seedling, right now it's putting down a nice big taproot that eventually won't be there. But yeah, if you pull it out now, you can do that, but then you would have to constantly water it. I mean, you could pull it out now and grow it in your house if you want to, as long as it's in a pot, you can grow it that way for sure. But if you're going to do it, probably the best time, if you want to leave it outside, the best time to do it would be when the leaves drop off that. And then it's dormant. You can dig it up. You can move it right away if you want. And then it'll just sit there until, you probably water it when you move it, but then just, wait until the spring and it'll be perfectly fine.
Another question came in about mulch. Someone's asking about pine needles for mulch.
Oh yeah, absolutely. With that is like the #1 mulch in the Southeast is pine mulch, because of all the loblolly pines. Actually there's some operations out there, tree farmers that are just harvesting the needles for mulch and not even worrying about the value of the timber. A lot of money to be made. Yeah, so it does perfectly well. I mean, there's a little bit more, acidic. That kind of mulch is acidic when it breaks down. Anything with the pine, it is. So if your soils are already really acidic, I don't know about using it, but chances are it's probably not. So yeah, pine mulch is great. I don't know, Delaware Forest Service, do you have any opinion on pine mulch?
Karen.
We haven't really used pine needles for mulch, but I would assume that they would be okay considering that's what's in the natural forest and lands.
Yeah, you can buy the bales in the Southeast. Ooh,
And that was our last question.
excellent. Okay, well, great. Well, this is a good session. We'll send out General will send out the recordings again of this one if you want to revisit, and then even the PowerPoint itself, if you don't want to hear me again. But yeah, the next session is going to really be about developing a planting plan for a project. And Taryn will talk to you about some resources that are available in the state of Delaware through urban and community forestry. Good session tonight. And yeah, let us know if you need anything. If not, we'll see you Wednesday.
Wonderful, great. Thank you, Craig.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye now.